welcome to the State Control Centre. My name's Tim Weebush, the Emergency Management Commissioner. I'm joined today by Diana Eadie from the Bureau of Meteorology, David Tuchek, from the State Agency Commander for Vic SES, and Blake and Tricia from Expression Australia. Leading into this high risk weather season, we were talking to the community about the risks of many emergencies occurring over this period. And we've certainly seen that in the last week, where we've seen severe to extreme heat wave, catastrophic bushfires, and now extreme flash flooding in the southwest of the state. It really is a timely reminder that communities need to be prepared for all types of emergencies, and make sure you have downloaded the Vic Emergency app. And if you're holidaying in an area that you're not normally staying in, then please make sure you set up a watch zone to receive the most timely and tailored information for the area that you may be holidaying in. At this point in time, we still have 8 watch and act and 16 advice level warnings that are out across the state. Most of those are for the fires that are still continuing, and also for the risk of smoke in the air and air quality at this time. Obviously yesterday we saw a very extreme weather event across the surf coast, extending from Wye River through to Lorne, with intense rainfall bringing over 180 millimetres of rain to that area and resulting in a range of impacts, and David Tuchek from the SES will speak to that again shortly. We do know that the road from Skeens Creek all the way through to Lorne remains closed, and that's because the road surface and bridges are still being assessed in some areas, and we are expecting that this will still take some further time. Moving back to the fires, despite yesterday's rainfall in that area, unfortunately it didn't cross the Otway fires, and so we still have over 10 major fires still in our state. That includes the 3 fires in Gippsland, which some of those fires have now seen good rainfall. It includes the Rich River, the Malakuta Lake Barracuda fire, and the Carrajigalong Cape Howe fire in Gippsland. We also have the fire at Wonnangatta in Gippsland that is still going, but again did see some rainfall yesterday. And then we've also got the Longwood fire that still continues, and also the Walwa Mount Lawson fire in the state's northeast. In good news, we now know that Harcourt, Kennedy Creek and Wiperfield fires have been listed as contained. Importantly, as we've said before, contained doesn't mean that those fires are entirely safe, but it does mean that they should cause no further threat to communities at this point in time. Since yesterday, we've also been conducting further impact assessments across all of the fire landscapes. We now have over 1,000 structures that have been either damaged or destroyed by these devastating fires. And our thoughts continue to be with those communities that have been so heavily impacted by these fires. What we do know now is we have 289 homes that have been destroyed, 18 homes that have been significantly damaged, and 526 outbuildings that have either been damaged or destroyed. The area that has seen the most significant increase in numbers in the last 24 hours is in the Longwood fire footprint, where we now know that we have, sadly, 213 homes that have been destroyed, and that's up from 173 yesterday, and 13 homes that are significantly damaged. That includes also 575 outbuildings and other structures. Not to mention the widespread stock losses and also damage to other agriculture and vineyards right across the fire footprints in our state. We're continuing to work hard at opening a range of roads across the state. That number is now just below 100 roads that now are still impacted and are being cleared. But we would ask people to make sure that you're visiting the Vic Traffic website and planning your journey and the route that you may take if you're heading in and around those areas. But again, the state of disaster still remains in place, and we do not want visitors or tourists or spectators entering into those fire-affected areas. At this stage, we should only be seeing residents or those that are supporting residents to get back onto their properties. In terms of relief centres, we still have the Mansfield and Wodonga relief centres that are available for communities being affected particularly by the Walwa and the Longwood fires. And we have 4 recovery hubs at Castlemaine, at Cobram, Beaufort and Skipton, where you can get additional information and access to recovery support services. If you're unable to attend one of those recovery hubs, I can encourage you to phone into our recovery hotline, which is 1800 560 760. That's 1800 560 760, and they can take you through a range of the support payments and grants that are available, including emergency relief payments, the disaster recovery allowance, and the Australian Government Disaster Recovery Payment. For households who have experienced 7 days without powers due to the fire, the Victorian and Australian governments are now providing financial relief through the prolonged power outage payment. And again, all of that information is on the Vic Emergency website at emergency.vic.gov.au or through that recovery hotline 1800 560 760. I'll now pass over to Diana Eady to take us through what the weather conditions were yesterday and what we might see over this coming week. Thanks, Diana.
Thank you, Commissioner, and good afternoon, everyone. Yesterday, we saw an extraordinary rainfall event unfold across the Great Ocean Road, with 186.2 millimetres recorded at Mount Cowley, just inland of Lorne, in the 24-hour period to 9 a.m. this morning. Importantly, the bulk of that rainfall fell in a very short period of around 6 hours. That well and truly exceeded the previous record at that particular location, which was 123.2 millimetres recorded back in 2021. This was a highly localised event with 25 to 100 millimetres recorded broadly across the Otway coastal fringe area. This heavy rain started from late yesterday morning, and a severe storm warning was issued at 11:57 a.m. for the risk of heavy rain and flash flooding. That was then escalated to the potential for intense rainfall and life-threatening flash flooding at 12:40 p.m. One important thing to note for this particular area and this event is that the Otway Coast Basin is what we call a flash flood catchment area. So rivers like the Wye and the Cumberland and also Separation Creek are flash flood areas. The Bureau of Meteorology issues warning for riverine flooding. Just due to the rapid response of some of these catchments, they're covered instead by a severe thunderstorm or severe weather warning as appropriate, as was issued yesterday. Fortunately, the risk of heavy rainfall is now confined to the far east of the state. There is some potential for some localised minor flooding in parts of the East Gippsland region over the coming days, but largely we've seen an easing trend in terms of the rainfall risk. We will see a return of the potential for severe thunderstorms to western parts of Victoria on Monday, extending further to the east on Tuesday. At this stage, it is looking like we'll see heightened fire dangers returning to Victoria on Friday and Saturday of next week. So the 23rd and 24th of January looks likely to be the next peak fire period for Victoria. Thank you, and now I'll pass over to David Tuchek from the State Emergency Services.
Thank you, Diana, and good afternoon. So there were a few impacts that were understood to take place down around Wye River and Lorne. So several vehicles were washed into the Cumberland River, which was certainly in the footage yesterday. Overnight, approximately 60 people were accommodated at the Apollo Bay High School and also at the Lorne Surf Lifesaving Club. The Red Cross and Salvation Army have done a tremendous effort in providing bedding and relief and meals for up to 600 people who were affected during this event overnight. There have been multiple bridges which have had impact assessments conducted during the course of today and have been cleared to reopen. However, the Cumberland River Bridge is still being assessed. There is a relief centre which is remaining open at the moment at the Stirling Reserve at 45 Otway Street in Lorne, and there'll be a community meeting there today at 3 p.m. Bit of a shout out to some of the responding agencies which have included FRB, CFA, Lifesaving Victoria, PCS of course, Victoria Police and AV. So a great thank you to the volunteers and the staff who've been assisting from those agencies and also the local government and relief agencies. I'll now hand back to the Emergency Management Commissioner. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Just in closing, I guess, as I mentioned at the start, we're still very early in our summer season, and the risk of fires, flash flooding, storms will be with us for many more weeks yet as we go through the coming months. We need the community to remain alert to their conditions. Make sure you have downloaded the Vic Emergency app. Know where to get the latest emergency information, either through the app, the website, or our emergency broadcasters, but to heed the warnings that are in place. So there are still over 20 warnings that are in place across Victoria at this time, and we need the community to keep up the great effort that has been occurring in following those warnings. We're happy to take any questions you might have.
I've got a few for Diana, if you would mind. Thank you. Could you talk to us about which warnings went out and, upon reflection, were they enough?
Sure. So, as mentioned, this was an extraordinary event in terms of the amount of rainfall that fell in a very short time period. The warnings that were issued were the initial severe thunderstorm warning for that risk of heavy rainfall that was issued at 11:57 a.m. and included that potential for flash flooding. That warning was escalated as we started to see increased rainfall rates and amended accordingly to include that potential for intense rainfall and life-threatening flash flooding at 12:40 p.m. Now, this was a really significant event, highly localised. In terms of the forecast, the warnings did cover that potential for flash flooding, but as always with these types of events, we do encourage people to make sure they're staying up to date with the latest forecasts and warnings, keeping an eye on the radar, and of course being across the emergency warnings on Vic Emergency as well.
So do you think the warnings could have been escalated more?
So, in addition to what Diana's just said, so the Bureau did issue that severe thunderstorm warning at 11:57 and followed by the very dangerous thunderstorm warning at 12:40. That was followed by a watch and act emergency warning at 12:58 for that community. And the first 000 call occurred at 8 minutes past 1 p.m, which was for flooding at the Big Four Caravan Park. And then at 20 minutes past 1, we had the first 000 call for cars that were starting to be washed away as a result of the flash flood waters. So that situation occurred very dynamically. The emergency warnings were in place. The Bureau had been issuing them from just prior to midday and were continually followed up throughout the afternoon. And that included an emergency warning using the emergency alert phone messaging system that went to over 10,000 mobile phones and landlines in that area.
So you do think those warnings were enough for people to know?
Look, I guess it's always one of those challenging things. We do believe that the warnings were adequate for what was needed at that point in time and were as timely as can be when you have that dynamic situation that thunderstorms bring.
And how many people were displaced? Were there any major injuries?
We believe in the order of 200 to 300 people were actually displaced, but the local community rallied around those that were in campsites and supported a number of those people overnight. As David from the SES has just mentioned, only 60 people needed support at relief centres at either Apollo Bay or Lorne, but we know there were several hundred others that were taken in by local community members or other family and friends in the area.
Any major injuries reported?
We've been very fortunate in this flash flood event that there's only one injury that has been reported, and that was a young child that was airlifted out of the flash flood zone, and they've been taken to hospital obviously. But otherwise at this stage we've been very fortunate with very minor injuries, and most importantly at this time Victoria Police are saying there are no missing persons.
Do you have an update on the condition of that child?
No, we don't at this stage.
Can I ask about the caravan recovery efforts? We understand that somebody's trapped in a caravan.
Yeah, so this afternoon we've got Department of Transport, both local governments being the Surf Coast Shire and Otway Shires that are working with those communities around what cleanup might need to be. I've received some images just prior to coming into this media conference that still shows significant debris, including vehicles that are up against the Cumberland River Bridge, and that's why it's still been difficult to assess that bridge, and also being able to get in to fully assess the cleanup. But both councils and Department of Transport are actively on the ground at this time.
But can I ask, it's seems like somebody was trapped in a caravan during the floods. Is that your understanding?
Look, during the flash floods, we know there were a number of people who had to very quickly relocate, both from caravans, from tents, and also just the general campgrounds in those areas. We understand the water came up very quickly, and that is the case of flash flooding. I guess when we see severe thunderstorms, they can appear and be in the landscape within 20 to 30 minutes without a lot of time to provide warnings. But in this case, thunderstorm warnings had been out for just over an hour before we started to see some of those impacts.
And do we know the circumstances of that child who was injured? Was he in the caravan park at the time?
We understand that the young child may have climbed onto the roof of one of the buildings inside the caravan park, but beyond that I don't have further details at this time.
Do you have an approximate age for this child?
No, I don't at this stage.
Do you know when the Great Ocean Road will open back up again?
Yeah, look, at this stage the Great Ocean Road is closed from Skeens Creek through to Lorne. As the SES have just mentioned, two of those bridges have been assessed. The Erskine Falls Bridge in Lorne has been cleared, as has the Wye River Bridge, but at this stage they're still trying to fully assess the Cumberland River Bridge, which is why the road remains closed, and at this stage it's still too early to assess how long that might take, given the debris and cars that are still up against that bridge.
Do you have advice for people heading down this weekend?
Yeah, look, if you are heading down into that area this weekend, be aware that there are significant detours in place, and if you don't need to be going beyond Lorne, then at this point in time our best advice is please don't travel beyond Lorne.
And do we know what is expected next, weather conditions wise? What should Victorians look out for?
I might go back to Diana for that.
In terms of the outlook period, we're seeing more settled conditions over the weekend, noting there is a slight risk of some local minor flooding in the far east Gippsland catchments. Severe storms could return to Victoria in the western parts on Monday, more likely for the east on Tuesday, so that'll be the next watch point, that potential for storms possibly severe Monday and Tuesday of next week. In terms of significant fire weather, the next heightened fire period will be Friday and Saturday, so the 23rd and 24th of January. Longer term, we are seeing the climate drivers indicate below average rainfall for the rest of the month and more near average for February and March, and warmer than average conditions throughout the period. That being said, even though we're forecasting below or near average rainfall conditions, of course, we can't rule out significant weather events and one-off events like we've just seen yesterday. So we do encourage people to stay up to date with the latest forecasts and warnings.
Quickly, Tim, can I ask you a question? It's not about the flooding. The grass fire at Rockbank, do you have any details on that?
I actually don't have any details immediately at hand on Rockbank, but we can follow that one up for you.
Tim, do we know how many structures were lost to the flooding?
At this stage, I've not had any confirmed losses of structures in the flooding that we've seen down on the Surf Coast, but obviously we've seen that there's a range of vehicles that are impacted, caravans that are impacted, and obviously a range of personal possessions like tents and other things at this time. But it's still too early in some of those places. There's fast running water still at Cumberland River, as we've seen in the imagery today. So as soon as it's safe to get in there, we'll be able to give you some further information.
And we don't know how many cars have been lost?
At this stage, we don't have a total number of cars lost, but we know it's in the vicinity of 10 to 20 vehicles that are definitely part of the mix at this stage.
One for David, maybe? It would be great to just talk through the recovery efforts at the moment, how your team's sort of feeling with so much to get through with the fires now, the flood, all of that sort of stuff.
Well, I guess what we can say is across the state, our responders have certainly been busy, volunteers, members, staff, and all the supporting agencies that work in alongside us during these significant times. So we add this one more into the mix. I guess the wonderful thing on the day is for what was such a rapid onset and not necessarily, no long-term forecast to understand that area would get the significant effect that it would have. The speed of which local response got into pace for that one, started to assist the local community. The fact that the warnings were heeded from what we can see, I think it's an extraordinary outcome to think about the footage that we've seen and the potential of that incident to have no reported missing persons at this time. I think that's wonderful, and including the low injury think from that perspective we're in a pretty good place. Obviously, as we go forward, we always think about the fatigue of our members, we think about the fatigue of the community and those who have been affected. And so our thoughts are always with those folk who are out there still getting through it. Sometimes we can lose the temperature or the heat out of Melbourne where there's a population density and we think, oh, it's all a bit over. But obviously it's continuing on in these rural areas where there are these significant impacts. And we know there's a lot of relief going on out there, including provision of fodder and the like. So we continue on and we look to the next event whilst we're still managing what we have.
Are you preparing for the next couple of weather warning sort of?
Of course. So we take opportunities. This is what we do when we get into these more campaign events. We will seek to rest out our crews when things are a little bit quieter, dare I say that word. We will obviously try and rest our crews. We'll try and to assist our community to their relief efforts as we do. And then we get ready for the next thing and we reposition ourselves, ready for that next one, get our posture on that front foot again. So we never take the foot off the throttle completely. We have to make sure we maintain that momentum and push through.
Do you have an idea of how many crews were sent to the flooding recovery efforts?
Oh, in terms of total crews, I don't have that specific number. I know for SES we have people in from Ballarat, from Bacchus Marsh, locally from Coal Lake, for example, Lawn, Polo Bay, South Barwon came up as well. So there's some of the local SES crews that were involved. And of course we had other agencies coming in that were sending up crews from out of Melbourne or out of Geelong. So yes, it was far-reaching in terms of the support. It was great to see.
Is this weather period unusual, like compared to previous years? Has SES been under more pressure this year?
I think what you're seeing is you see an evolution. We do see the weather ebb and flow. I'm sure Diana could speak more thoroughly to that. But when we have this time of year, as we've seen with the fires last Friday and other events, you don't necessarily get particular days or catastrophic days. They're having extreme winds as well, some of those damaging winds or destructive winds. So it's the nature of summer season, shall we call it, where we will have events which are of the fire variety, events which are going to be of the severe thunderstorm or destructive thunderstorm variety. And so we just have to work with what the weather gives us, and we respond with the training that we have.
So you have no concerns about SES's capability to continue helping Victorians through these kind of weather patches?
I'd like to say we've got a high level of confidence in our volunteers and our members and the training across all responder agencies to deal with these emergencies, and I think we can see from how they're working well together today. A very clear example of that is that we had Coal Lake Incident Control Centre set up and ready for fire, but ready at any moment, as were a range of other incident control centres across East Gippsland for the forecast weather, ready to switch in and support storm efforts and flooding efforts as well. So where they weren't fully engaged in the east, for example, we were able to throw very quickly into the Coal Lake Incident Control Centre and affect the sort of control that we would like to see for an event like this, to make sure the appropriate resources are in to respond.
Was there a heavy reliance on volunteers given the location of the flooding?
Well, there certainly is a reliance on our volunteers, because particularly in rural areas, for agencies like CFA and for SES, and let's not forget Life Saving Victoria, volunteers are the lifeblood. That's predominantly what makes up those organisations. So do we rely on them? Absolutely we do. And they do a wonderful job.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.